time, people like Nile Rodgers or Sting or Billy Joel, Elton John. I worked for many years with Paul McCartney, which was fantastic because I was a huge fan of the Beatles. So, I've been fortunate to work with many of my idols. I was the first person to organize concerts in Saudi Arabia. So at the time, 5, 6 years ago, people said that's impossible. You can never do that, and we did it.
It's such a pleasure having you here today
Thank
with
you.
our
Thank you
conversation.
for thank you for agreeing to interview me and
Yeah,
feature me. Thank you.
of course, pleasure. So I would say maybe we could start that you introduce yourself and how you started your career.
My first job was in a record company.
Mhm.
So I started at Sony Music, the record label, in their London offices, and I was started at the bottom, making cups of tea, photocopying things, just getting my head down, looking for opportunities. And I was fortunate that within Sony, I got a proper job pretty soon as a radio and television plugger, and then in the marketing department. And then I decided to break out and start managing artists, and kind of went from there. But yeah, initially the first job was at Sony Music, literally making tea, and the occasional coffee.
Yeah, I think this is how you start, no? When you are young and want to be in this industry.
I think so. The music business is quite challenging to get into,
Hmm.
and when you're young, the idea of working in a big organization like a Sony
Yeah.
is really exciting. Working with loads of artists and being in a big environment was super exciting at the time. It was a
Mm.
dream for me. And the only problem with an organization like Sony is there's thousands and thousands of people who work there, so it becomes quite challenging to get to the top of a big organization like that. But it was fantastic experience at the time. And
Mm.
central London, the offices were in Soho. Every
Mm.
night there were parties and events, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot
That's
of fun.
nice. So what
Yeah.
made you decide like going in the music industry? Is also someone from your family in this industry?
Um,
Or-
yeah, my father was a songwriter,
Okay.
so um, but songwriting's a whole different sort of area of the business. But he was a very talented songwriter. So I guess I was exposed to music from an early age. But really, the main reason why I went into music was just for personal reasons. When I was 21, out of university, it just seemed like a lot of fun. It seemed an exciting environment. I didn't want to wake up early. A lot of friends of mine were going into like finance jobs, and the idea of getting up at sort of 6 a.m. and commuting to an office just wasn't for me at that time. I wanted something a little bit more exciting and fun than that. So really, it was music or fashion or movies, and I got my opportunity in music first and stuck at it,
When did you started like with the production?
booking artists and
Yeah.
this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what I do. What the company does now started in about 2010, so about 15 years ago.
Hmm.
For about 7 or 8 years prior to that, I was managing artists, which was fantastic experience. Being at the front end of an artist's career, making all the executive decisions, and having some artists who became very successful, and that really helped, not just my experience and skill set, but exposed me to so many relationships. So I had some artists who were signed in America to big record companies in America. So I moved out to New York and started hanging out with lots of the American music scene, the artists, the executives, and so on in America. And these relationships became really important, really valuable. So in 2010, when I wanted to stop managing artists and I wanted to go more into the live business, live music business, having those relationships that I could fall back on and call was super helpful. It really got me started. A lot of artists I met through being a manager were the first artists that I booked for live events and shows. So it was a natural progression, And yeah, that change happened about 2010, around that period.
Right, yeah. And you do these kind of events all around the world, or do you have specific cities?
No, no, we operate globally.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, the main thrust of what we do, we kind of do two things.
Mhm.
One is public shows where usually a sponsor or a government you know, an institution will want us to put on a concert or a festival for them. You know, organize the event and book the talent and manage the process. So that's one thing we do. And then the other thing we do, which is what we do most frequently, what we're probably most famous for, is where we book artists for private events, weddings, parties, celebrations, corporate shows, one-off events where someone will want a big mega star to perform at their party, their event, and we have the relationships and the experience to be able to secure the artist, the performer,
Mhm.
get the client, good terms, sort everything out, the travel, the production, the riders, the dressing rooms, whatever's required, and make sure that it's a successful performance, great event, and that everyone's happy.
Can you name a few artists you collaborate together?
Yeah, I mean, we've pretty much over the years booked
Mm.
everyone you can think of from
Oh,
yeah, Lady Gaga, Elton John, Billy Joel, Janet Jackson, Bruno Mars, David Guetta. Uh, Gosh, I mean, like Robbie Williams. Like we book everyone. We're independent. We have relationships with every artist. There's nobody that we can't book. We just try and keep it to a pretty high level
mhm.
because that's what our sort of relationships and expertise are. So
Mm.
yeah, we've got. I mean, every year we book 40, 50, 60 different artists.
Oh, wow, that's great. Are there any like musicians you love from the past?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I like 70s music, so I listen to a lot of old rock music. Your Jimi Hendrix's, Led Zeppelins, Rolling Stones. This is kind of what I listen to in my own time. Um, Not many of those artists from the 70s, unfortunately, are still around today. So sadly, I can't book many of them for our shows and events, but that's life. I mean, there are some. I've been fortunate to work with some artists who I, truly adore that I listen to in my own time. People like Nile Rodgers or Sting or Billy Joel, Elton John. I worked for many years with Paul McCartney, which
Mhm.
was fantastic because I was a huge fan of the Beatles. So, I've been fortunate to work with many of my idols, as well as obviously a lot of modern, contemporary acts as well. But yeah, there's so many great artists that we've worked with, and they've inspired me, and it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also such an interesting kind of work you have because you meet so many interesting people.
Yeah, yeah, not just the artists. I mean, the artists are fantastic, and we're fortunate that pretty much all the artists we work with are globally famous and recognized. But also, we're lucky that we have incredible clients, private clients, corporate clients who, some of our private clients are, some of the most celebrated businessmen on the planet, some of the most successful industrialists on the planet, and spending time with them is also just as exciting, just as interesting. I love hearing the story of how some of our billionaire clients, got into business and developed themselves. To me, that's just as interesting as hearing about, a rock star, a pop star, making their music.
What advice you can give for like the younger generation who want to start also in the music industry?
I can only tell you how it worked for me, which was just start at the bottom. Don't be proud, just start at the bottom, absorb and learn as much as you possibly can, even those what seemed relatively insignificant experiences when you were sort of starting may come back to be of great assistance in the future. I was quite lucky that in a way that I worked at somewhere like Sony, a big record company, but I was also lucky that I left and then ventured out on my own and learnt from my own experiences too. So I had sort of both sets
Hmm.
of expertise guiding me. And just learn everything, pick up everything, and don't be too proud. Even now, I might be working with, some mega star on a huge show, but I'll still go in the dressing room and check,
Yeah.
the water's the right temperature and things like that. You can't be too proud. You've got to be humble, and do your business and don't be too proud.
Yeah, but that I think is how you also keep professional, you know. You do all these kind of steps like you did 15 years ago and today, you know, you don't
Yeah,
change.
yeah. The processes are the same. We have the same formula and same checklists, and yeah, I have obviously a team who go in and make a lot of things happen, but I always go myself and double check everything, because all it takes is one bad show, one bad event, one bad experience, and everyone will be talking about it, and that will reflect really badly on me and my business. So yeah, I try and check and double check every little detail.
What's been the biggest turning point in your career?
I wouldn't say there's one turning point. I'd say there's been a few situations that, were massively beneficial to the development of myself and the company. I think there was a time when I had Jay-Z signed one of my artists to a big deal in America. As part of that deal, I was relocated to America and shared offices with Jay-Z and his team, and having that exposure to someone as celebrated and iconic as Jay, and his relationships and his network was really, really good for me. And then yeah, I'd say there's been a few situations like that. I was fortunate when, for example, David Guetta, when he was just kind of breaking through in 2010, 2011, I managed to get his rights to promote his concerts in Asia. This was suddenly became hugely successful because he very quickly became a superstar, and I was able to turn concerts that maybe previously were selling 5,000 tickets into concerts that were selling 25,000 tickets. So
Oh,
that was really important, just to get that relationship at that stage. But there's been I wouldn't say there's one thing. I just would say over a long period of time, plugging away, working with good people, putting on good shows, building your reputation, and your network, over a steady period of time. That's probably been
yeah.
the main cause of our success.
And what's the biggest lesson you've learned in your career?
I think just to be humble. And I've always, the artists who've usually had the longest career,
Yeah.
or the artists who've usually maybe had success, then they've fallen off the radar, then they've come back again. These artists usually consistently are behind good people. The artists and the executives who are very flashy and very arrogant and very aggressive, they generally fall by the wayside eventually. So I think, from what I've seen, being humble is a really important characteristic.
Mm.
Um, and also in my business, knowing that I'm not the star. The star is the person on stage performing. I'm just facilitating them.
Mm.
And so just knowing your position, knowing your place in the pecking order, I think that's really important.
And are there any exciting projects you are working right now which you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that excites me, so we do a lot of private parties and weddings, where an event organizer, a wedding planner, or some, billionaire will contact us and describe their event to us, and we will help them, find the right performer and for their event and their budget and their occasion. So we get a lot of that, and we're very successful at that. But I think the thing that I get most excited by is when we go to a new territory, a new market, because it's challenging. Trying to figure out how to put on the production and the travel and the logistics in a new country when you're going there for the first time. Even though I've been doing this a long time, that still presents challenges.
Yeah.
So in April, we've got our first series of shows in Jamaica.
Okay.
So I love the Caribbean. We've been lucky to do shows in, St. Bart's and various places in the Caribbean, but never in Jamaica. So this will be quite exciting, just figuring out, how to put these quite big artists concerts on in Montego Bay. And then we have a project in Qatar, which we're just working on at the moment, just trying to get some big pop stars to contract them for shows in Qatar. Again, I find that exciting. New market, new relationships, new challenges. So yeah, for me, going to a new country for the first time is what sort of makes me excited these days.
What's one motto you live by?
I think that anything is possible. You know, we've delivered a lot of shows that and a lot of performances that people probably didn't think could happen. For example, I got a call about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, from a contact who had a relationship with the government in Saudi Arabia. And at the time, Saudi Arabia didn't allow concerts, didn't allow men and women to, attend events together. You know, it was all, I know Saudi Arabia now has modernized tremendously and it's a very open, much more open, market environment. But 5, 6 years ago, it was completely different. So I was quite proud that I was the first person to organize concerts in Saudi Arabia that men and women could attend together, women could dance. They were public. They were the first televised concerts in the region. So at the time, 5, 6 years ago, people said that's impossible. You can never do that, and we did it. We did it with big artists, Lionel Richie, Enrique Iglesias, Jamiroquai, and so on, loads and loads of these concerts. And so that was an example of, people said it was impossible, but really, if you put your mind to it, you focus, you know what you're doing, then anything is possible.
Yeah, right. You're correct. It was such an interesting conversation with you, Zak.
Thank you for taking the time whilst you're in work. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.